2020 welcomes you all for this wonderful session. Today we have Professor Dr. Praveen Maghelal with us as a part of Global Architecture Vision series, presenting on sustainable communities through sustainable transportation. I'm Architect Aishwarya, Assistant Professor at SRMC Brahmapuram. As a moderator of this session, I'm happy to welcome all the participants and especially the speaker of the day, Dr. Professor Praveen Maghelal. We welcome you, sir. Before commencing the session, I request all the participants to keep their audio and video turned off for a hassle-free experience, and also kindly use the chat box to post your questions, which will be taken up by the speaker and the Q&A session after the presentation. And also kindly refrain from using any offensive words in the chat box. I now welcome our convener, Vice Principal, SRMC, Architect Lokesh Madhivanan, to give away the welcome note. Over to you, sir.
Yes, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I welcome Dr. Architect Praveen Maghelal. Welcome, sir, for our esteemed university, and thank you for accepting our invitation and ready to give the presentation to our students and all the participants here. And they are going to get the knowledge from you, and you are doing a great job. I searched your profile and seen all the inputs you have given to the architecture community. It was really nice, sir. And in this time, I want to thank my management on this, our chairman, sir, co-chairman, sir, director, sir, and Dean ENT and Dean KTR for this wonderful opportunity and support. And I'm thanking my students and the faculty members, those who are doing really a great job. Now, I'm without any delay, I'm handing over the mic to the moderator. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request the faculty coordinator, Architect Venkatesh Babu, sir, to welcome our guest speaker of the session. Over to you, sir. Sir, your voice is not audible.
I'm not sure it's just me or everyone is not able to hear.
No, sir, he's not audible.
Okay, probably his mic is on mute.
Sir, can you please unmute?
Sir, Babu sir, you're not audible, sir.
Not audible, sir. My plug எடுத்துட்டு போடுங்க. So, Venkatesh Babu sir, I will continue with the introduction.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, please.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible now.
Hello? Am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir. Please carry on.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Your voice is clear, sir. Your voice is clear. You can
Hello?
carry on.
Sir, you're audible, sir.
Hello?
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Audible. Yes, sir. We can
Do you hear
hear
me?
you. Yes, sir.
Hello?
Sir, நான் introduction பண்ணிடுறேன். Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry for that inconvenience. I introduce our today's speaker, Praveen Maghelal, and my best friend. I would like to introduce him. Maybe. Yes, Praveen Maghelal, a graduate student of SRM University, KTR. Dr.Ar.Praveen Maghelal received his master's degree in infrastructure planning and doctorate in urban and regional sciences from Texas A&M University in US. He has an interdisciplinary background in civil engineering, architecture, and urban planning. He has taught at universities in the United States and in United Arab Emirates over a span of 13 years. Currently, he serves as Associate Professor of Sustainable Critical Infrastructure at Khalifa University in UAE. Khalifa University is a number 1 rank of all universities in UAE and is ranked number 211th in QS Gold ranking system. His research and teaching interests focus on development of sustainable communities. He focuses primarily on topics of transit-oriented developments, community health and safety, and public health issues. He has published about 50 research articles, book chapters, research and academic reports in world-renowned venues. And he has been recognized for his contribution to the field of planning. One of his articles was awarded the Best Journal article by the Journal of American Planning Association, one of the most prestigious journals in planning. He has also been felicitated with the Best Professor in Engineering Systems by Middle East Education Leadership Award and 100 Most Dedicated Professors, the World Education Congress. He was recognized with the Inspiring Alumni Award and Outstanding Alumni Award by his alma mater, SRM University, KTR. Recently, he was elected as the co-chair for Global Planning Educators Interest Group, a special interest group within Associate of Collegiate of Schools of Planning all over the globe. I'll invite Dr. Professor Praveen Maghelal to present his work. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Ashok. As you mentioned, we've known each other from a long time, and I really thank you for this opportunity. This is obviously a privilege coming back to my own institution to talk about what I've been doing. So it is definitely very humbling for me. Well, as you see right now, technology is not the best help, and nothing can substitute being in person and talking to all of you in person. But we are limited with the situation that we are in. And nonetheless, I appreciate this opportunity. Wish I could meet you all in person and talk to you about my research, but nonetheless, I'll be more than available to communicate with you beyond and besides this presentation. If anything that you have doubts about or questions about or need more clarifications, I'll be happy to help you out or feed you more information. Let me just start with my presentation, if you can give me a moment. I'm hoping everyone is able to view my presentation, so I'll just proceed. So my topic today is about sustainable communities and how am I investigating or deriving this using the transportation aspect of it, and especially sustainable transportation. Being a faculty, one of the things that I am used to is having a two-way interaction in class, and one thing boring about us faculty is we can talk a lot. So I am going to make it a little bit more interactive. So I hope you guys can feed in some of your views as I ask questions as the presentation goes ahead. So just sharing my academic and professional roadmap. I did my diploma in civil engineering and obviously my bachelor's in architecture at SRM, where I was keenly interested in about designing large-scale buildings. And my thesis or my final project was on designing airports. And that's why I chose infrastructure planning as my focus for my master's. Having said that, I will tell you I'm not a visionary. I'm not someone who knew what I wanted to do when I began this. This is something that is like connecting dots. I learned something and I realized that there is more interest to certain topic that I would like to investigate on, and that's how things started happening for me. So I'm probably nowhere a match to what you guys are. Most of you youngsters definitely know what you want to do, or maybe you know for sure what you don't want to do. But for me, it was a journey where I gradually realized what is my interest. So once I was in the Masters of Infrastructure Planning, the idea was to learn about large-scale buildings. And I was not too interested in residential or commercial kind of development. I was more interested in infrastructures, which are like stadiums and airports, of course. That was my interest. But when I joined for my master's, the project that we had to work on was about urban planning, and it was about transportation infrastructure. So there my focus changed a little bit. I did get excited about that topic, and that's what I did for my PhD at Texas A&M. And once I graduated from there, I have been an assistant faculty and an associate faculty at various institutions in the US. And currently, I am an associate professor at Khalifa University. And as was mentioned in my introduction, my primary focus is about sustainable communities. So my academic research, teaching, and community outreach is about creating sustainable communities or assessing communities for its sustainability. And I look at three agendas of these sustainable communities are in three visions: is transportation, public safety, and community health. While I can talk, as I said, for hours on these topics, I am going to focus my presentation primarily related to sustainable communities and transportation. So just to grasp, I mean, the sustainability is a term that has been there for about 2 decades now, and we all are introduced to this term. So I'd like some of the students or any one of you to just switch on your mic and tell me what sustainability is. In a layman's term, I don't want a proper technical definition, but do you know what sustainability is? Define it. Come on, there's no grading for this. All right, I guess we should have put grading for you guys. Then maybe you might have responded. Well, nonetheless, I'll just proceed with what primarily has been defined as the three aspects of sustainability, are the three E's, which is the environment, economy, and social equity. We all have been introduced to these terms and these variances of sustainability. And the primary purpose of these three E's are to be balanced in such a way that we are able to create communities that are more sustainable. So in many ways, sustainability, which is primarily defined by the Brundtland Commission report, defines it as something where we are trying to meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. So that's primarily what sustainability is. But this is a very vague definition in many sense, especially when you try to operationalize it, which is meaning how do you measure sustainability? How do you make sure that you have a way of assessing sustainability? So if I am going to look at two separate concepts, let's say social systems and then ecology, there are many variables, are many factors that impacts each of these sustainable events. So social sustainability is assessed by various variables or various indicators. So is the ecosystem. So, and these variables or these indicators interact among themselves. So if you look at this image, just the social system itself, the indicators are so complexly related within and among each other. And then it's the ecosystem. But what we are trying to analyze is sustainability, which brings at least those two elements together. So the complexity is created when you try to do an analysis of sustainability at a holistic level. So if I were to analyze the social systems and ecosystems, you would see these are various indicators that interact not just among themselves, but across each other. And that makes it even more complex to assess sustainability. And that has been an existing problem for every researcher because we are trying to grasp more knowledge to understand these interactions that can help us come up with policies or recommendations or designs that can help us achieve the sustainability that we want. So looking in this 2D plane, we understand that these relationships are pretty complex, right? So just looking at two systems, the social systems and ecosystems, just analyzing that itself is pretty complex, pretty mind-boggling. But on the other hand, if you look at sustainability, the way it has been studied, it varies by the discipline in which the sustainability is assessed. So it could be business, it could be supply chain, it could be ecosystem, it could be environment, it could be economy. Every aspect of our everyday life can be assessed using sustainability, but it is different. The platform in which it is assessed is pretty different. Adding to that complexity is what we have to do as urban planners or architects is to achieve this three-dimensional sustainable outcome, which is livability. So what we are trying to do as urban planners, as landscape architects, as architects, interior designers, we want to create an environment which is livable for the people who are in those communities or in those houses. And so we are not just faced with this two-dimensional complex relationship, but we are also looking at how do we interact these in a balanced way that we can achieve a good livable environment or good livable conditions for the humanity and obviously for all sorts of ecosystems. So that adds a little bit more complexity, and obviously that makes us a little bit more privileged in the sense that we are dealing with something that is more than just two-dimensional. So, what is a sustainable development approach? I'm hoping you guys have learned about many sustainable approaches, in particularly in sense of architecture and urban planning. I hope you guys have heard of that. If you have, I'd like to see if any one of you can tell some approaches that has been generally used or prescribed by developers or urban planners. Have you guys heard of any such approaches? Still no one? All right. I hope you guys have heard of sustainable development approaches, which are close to, let's just say, 4 different scales or 4 different aspects. Some of the more common approaches that are used all over the world as sustainable planning approaches or sustainable development approaches are smart growth, compact city, new urbanism approaches, and the transit-oriented development. Now, I won't say all of these are independent of each other. They all feed off of each other. The understanding of sustainable development is more holistic or more large scale when you look at smart rural and compact city. Whereas if you look at new urbanism and transit-oriented development, they are more of a smaller scale, which is generally a neighborhood scale. Also, these approaches, which are smart growth and compact city, are more policy oriented. They are more descriptive. So they make suggestions of how you can create regions that are more sustainable. How can you make your ecosystem for the entire region more sustainable? Be it water systems, be it your infrastructure systems, how do you make it more sustainable? On the other hand, new urbanism and transit-oriented development are more design-focused. They are derived by what we call as form-based coding. So these form-based documents tend to advise or tell planners and architects what kind of design you would want to implement in your community to make it more sustainable, more locally focused. So these are more prescriptive in nature, and these all vary in scales. And as you move from left top to right bottom on the left, these vary by the sizes of the community it tends to address. So what I am going to focus on particularly is the transit-oriented development. So what is transit-oriented development? These are a small scale or pedestrian pocket developments that are focused primarily around a transit stop. Generally, it tends to be of a size of, let's say, 2,000 feet, which is not just a number that you have to stick to. It just varies by community and the kind of development that you're going to look at. And it includes different kinds of land uses. So not just horizontal, but vertical as well. So a single building could have commercial development, and on the top you could have offices, and then followed up on the upper floors you could have residential development. So having a vertical land use and a horizontal land use, which is different kinds of commercial, residential, entertainment and recreational services, all those in very close proximity to each other in such a way that people in that community don't have to use motorized mode or especially use car for their travel. So that's the primary idea, is to shift this focus from being a car-oriented community to more of a walking, biking, transit-focused community. Besides that, this is like at an urban scale, it is interactive in the sense that these communities, these small hubs connect each other in an efficient way. That way, people who want to use public transit or want to bike and walk have easy access to those destinations and well interconnected with each other. So at a larger scale, these small pockets connect with each other with more focus of having a more linear interaction of mobility. So when we talk about this interaction, why do we have to look especially about urban development or generally developments and transportation? The reason being both urban development and transportation infrastructure tends to have a chicken-egg relationship. There is no saying if transportation, which is saying if you put in the roads and streets and have good sidewalks, it would mean the development is going to happen in those places, or the development that happens in those places are going to be successful. On the other hand, just having high-rise buildings and a lot of development with no proper infrastructure connection would actually make those developments a failure. So researchers who have looked at urban development transportation, including myself, we are not really able to entangle this relationship to say that one affects another. It's a very interactive process, and hence it is very difficult to say what leads to what. Having a major urban development would lead to change in infrastructure, or would it just adding good infrastructure would lead to a successful urban development? It's a pretty complex relationship to analyze. To add to that, when you look at it in economic terms, if you look at the expenses for a household, for an individual in a particular household, if an individual belongs to a low-income household, So, and let's just say in terms of US dollars, let's say about 12 to 15,000 US dollars as their income. What happens is if they are within the city area versus if they live at the edge of the city or the outer city area, the cost for their housing and transportation tends to vary. And that gets impacted more for people who are of low income versus medium income. So if you look at the bar charts, if you look at the low income household bar chart and look at the differences from the city area, which is the center of the city, to the outer city area, you would see the major expense for a household is 70% of paying their household payments, EMIs and stuff like that, and for paying for their transportation. This is especially important for people who live in communities that are not connected to transit services or by walking and biking. These are communities that are connected by cars. So the expenses for a household of low income, 70% of that goes just in managing the basic needs of their lifestyle. This is what feeds into why transit-oriented communities are important, because it tells us that especially people of low income tend to have very less liberty of having more funds available to them for their recreational purposes. Majority of the funds that they earn goes in just managing their basic needs of household and transportation. And that's why having community that are more compact, though tend to have more intermodal connectivity, which is having more walking, biking, public transit, including cars, not to exclude that, but including cars, but focuses on making sure that people are able to access destinations by more sustainable modes of travel is critical for the more disadvantaged population, which is what the low-income households are. So as you go higher in incomes, obviously the percentage of your income towards your transportation and household tends to be of a lesser percentage. So again, public transit has always been something that is more related to people of low income. But that is majority of the population all around the world. So we need to address it in sense of how we can provide an efficient transportation interconnected system for these lower cadre individuals or households. So what are we trying to do when we are saying we want to achieve a sustainable transportation? Basically, it just means that we are trying to address the issue of extensive use of cars. So even for short trips, especially in the Western world, people tend to use their cars to access destinations. And what we are trying to do with this outcome of sustainable transportation is to shift this travel mode from cars to more of a sustainable travel, which is either non-motorized mode of travel, which is walking and biking, or motorized mode of travel, which is using public bus or public transportation or metro system. So how do you do that? How do we achieve that? And that's the reason the type of development that a community is, it makes a difference on how people or what modes of travel do people use for their everyday trips. Also, we know for sure that entire region, most of the cities are designed in such a way that cars are made more accessible versus walking, biking. If you were, and if you had a chance ever to visit a place where I did my PhD, which is Texas, you would never want to walk on the street. You would not know how and when a large truck would just run you over without even realizing that it did, because it's so much oriented towards motorized transportation, especially like cars and trucks, that it does not have even the least facility that's required for people who are of lower income, who cannot afford a car and use that infrastructure. So travel for them becomes more of a deterrent, and that's what we want to negate. That's what we want to reduce. So we want to address this low or medium accessibility by other modes of transportation and make it more accessible for especially the low and medium income communities. So this is just a design approach of what you would want to do when you say we are creating a transit-oriented development. Some things that you would want to do is look at a transit stop and look at varying distances from 400 meters to 600-800 meters. This would be primarily a walking distance. 400 meters generally is considered to be an easy walkable distance for people who live in those communities to get to transit. But again, walking, biking has a little bit more accessibility, and hence up to 1600 meters, people can live in those communities and still be called a transit-oriented community. Why is this important? It's because when you want to do an objective assessment of how efficient a community is for using transit and being called a transit-oriented development, you need to create a boundary. You need to understand where is the geography within which we can analyze the efficiency of transit-oriented development. And that's the reason knowing these distances are important. What does it target? It targets having a very compact kind of development. So even if it's single family residential houses, still having a more I know some of you have questions. I'll get to that as soon as I'm done with the presentation. So just hold on with your thoughts, but please let the questions keep coming. So when I'm talking about these compact development, we want to have different uses irrespective of single family, multi-family, high-rise residential versus low-rise commercial. All these still have to be accessible and very close in sense of its development. Having both vertical and horizontal land uses is again part of this approach, and making sure that the entire development is multimodal, which is saying that having easy access by walk, bike, having people, even disabled individuals, having to use that community without another individual support. So that is the kind of community we are trying to create when you're developing a transit-oriented development. So this is what the approach is, and what do you want to achieve? Obviously, the idea is when you're designing a community which is probably transit-oriented, you want to achieve very high density, at least medium to high density, even if not medium. The idea being that you want to make sure that the more number of people living in that community, the more probability they would have of leaving their cars and using public transportation for their everyday trips. Also, a community that has development that provides a variety of socioeconomic activities, and that could increase the vitality of the community, which is saying there should be something called a day life in that community and a night life in that community. That makes the place more safer, more appealing for people to live in that. A community that can encourage a lot of physical activity. So these are communities that are going to have people of all age group living in that development, and you want to make sure that you have enough places and enough interaction and connectivity among open spaces, parks, and recreational areas that people can achieve basic minimum required physical activity of at least 30 minutes per day. Also, these communities are supposedly required to be more energy efficient, not just by transportation purposes, but by also buildings. The HVAC system of these communities are supposedly what we call as the 3-pearl, 5-pearl system of trying to achieve the LEED certification. And most of these buildings should tend to do that so they can be more energy efficient as well. So that's what you're targeting when you're trying to say you're creating a TOD. So it's not just having a development that's around transit station, but it also something that results in more sustainable lifestyle. So these are some examples of how probably developments can change. And again, I'm using examples from my study area and my region of analysis, which is primarily in US. So if you look at these are communities that are barren, hardly developed. Obviously, it's not very appealing to walk or bike in these communities. How do you change them? How do you make them more appealing? How do you make them more dense? So these are figurative approaches of how planners and designers can achieve what they want to by changing or shifting the focus of how they design the communities. This is again another example. So I'm just going to show a few examples of how transformations can happen for the existing infrastructure to make places more appealing and make it more vital. So if this is a present scenario, how do you change? So if you look at this, the land use has to change. There needs to be change in the coding and making sure that you have development that brings in more density and variety of people from different ethnicity, people from different income can live and play together. And yeah, one more thing that I forgot to mention is this idea of having this compact transit-oriented development is to make sure that it is a community that allows people to live, work, and play in the same community. So they don't have to travel to different communities. While that is a good idea, but the challenge becomes if people are not going to travel across communities, why would you have public transportation system? It's a dual-edged sword, but if you have a community where at least 30% of the people living in that community can live, work, and play in that community, you are doing a good job with it. And obviously, you want to make sure that there is good amount of development that is attractive in your community for other people in other communities to come and visit your community. For instance, a transit-oriented community could have a large opera hall. Another community can have a good auditorium. Another community good theaters, recreational areas. So that would attract people to go across communities and still use public transportation as long as they are very well connected. This is again how to make almost a dead street more viable, make it more attractive for people. So having kiosks, restaurants, open seatings, all of this makes a difference on how the place becomes more appealing. So these are different kinds of design approaches that have been implemented, used, or proposed in communities that are otherwise pretty much dead. So what are the specific elements that we can look at in the sense of creating communities that are more vital? So some things that can be added in an existing environment. And this is not to say that you can do everything at all in all communities. Obviously, there are limitations, but at least these are approaches that are available for planners and architects to implement, or some of these to be implemented to make place or the community in which individuals live a little bit more viable. So things like giving an identity to a community. So when one drives through that community or walks into that community, they know that they've come to a special place. So having that identity makes people attracted to that community. And for people who live in that community, it helps them have a proudness of the community that they live in. They want to contribute more. They want to make the community more nicer, more safer, more clean. So having that identity makes a difference in people's perception of where and who they belong with. Pedestrian scale street lighting, not going those high-rise street lights, which at times doesn't even serve the purpose that it's supposed to. Having a very attractive street crossing. This is critical because both for people who are ADA and people who are blind or people who are less oriented towards walking, it just encourages having this different texture, different color, attracts people to be a little bit more walking oriented rather than just driving. So let me see. Curb extension, which is creating more space between the pedestrian environment and the actual driving environment. So that makes people more safe, and hence they are not worried about being on the road, walking along the sidewalk, thinking somebody might just drive over. Narrow lanes. This is critical because this reduces, by psychological research, it reduces the people's need to drive fast. So once they are in a community which is more compact, you want to make sure that when people are outside, they are not run over by vehicles. And so you want to create that perception of people having to drive a little bit slower than what they would otherwise. So making the lanes of the streets a little bit narrower. Generally, we tend to have a lane which is around 12 to 14 feet. But if you look at the cars, it's hardly 6 to 8 feet at the maximum. So narrowing the street down would give a perception to a driver to drive slow, just because they would think that it's such a short space, and that would by nature make them drive slow, and that makes the place more appealing. Creating small parklets, pocket parks, which is just creating a temporary garden area or some small shrubs and trees around where people can sit and chat, that makes the place again more attractive. So the more people you see on the street, more people interacting with each other, you would feel the place is having more social capital, and you would want to live in a place like that. And also it increases the safety aspect of the community. So you always have an eye on the street to take care of making sure that bad elements aren't engaged in that community. Street trees definitely adds value. We've done a research where we did a virtual environment analysis, and we realized that irrespective of people living in urban or suburban environment, if there are trees added to those environment, people tend to drive slower. And that is significant, especially in suburban kind of development where the street widths are pretty high and there's hardly any parking on the street. People drive like crazy. And so having or adding those street trees by nature made people, for whatever reason, drive slower. And that is significant finding because most of the suburban communities in the United States tend to have very little street trees on them. They are more wide lanes and more pedestrians, which are more concrete. Chica lanes is creating this sort of, it's basically creating a diversion on the street just to make sure that the traffic tends to slow down, especially at intersections. So having two straight lanes going across would make people just drive fast, or if they want to go head over another street, another lane, they would tend to do that, which is risky for both drivers and pedestrian users of the community. So adding these Chica lanes would make them realize that they cannot go beyond this in that lane, and so they need to wait till the other car goes, and that again adds to them driving a little bit slow. So these are all different elements, but how has all of these elements helped the community? Has there been an effective outcome of changing an existing community to make it more sustainable, transportation oriented? So research has shown that having a community like that, which is compact, which is well developed, which are more mixed use, tends to reduce a household budget on transportation costs significantly. So we saw for the low income, the transportation cost was around 33%. And research has shown that that has gone down because people tend to walk and bike more rather than okay. Sure. Okay. Sorry, I had some request for annotation. All right. And it also reduces the crash rates by 46%, which is pretty significant, right? I mean, you don't want people walking in a community where people have a perception of getting run over by other vehicles. So a community that can give them a safe perception of safety would definitely be more appealing for people to walk and bike. Vehicle to pedestrian accidents reduces, property values goes up. So if the place becomes very attractive, obviously people are going to want to live in this community, place which is well shaded. There's always activity on the street, eyes on the street. There's always some kind of social and cultural event going on. Those kind of places are very attractive for people to live in. So hence, once it becomes attractive, the property values goes up. So does the businesses, revenue from the businesses. Number of trees that are added in these communities tend to have a better impact on the urban heat index than the forest trees itself. So again, a design approach which can bring in more urban gardens or urban forestry into urban development can be very effective. 47% are more likely to be active. So communities that are more compact, has more mixed uses, which is parks, which are well connected, people tend to be more active. And a minimum requirement by the Health Commission is at least 30 minutes of physical activity every day. So how many of us really do that? At least moderate to vigorous activity. So this can encourage people to walk and bike more, and that becomes a utilitarian walking that adds to their activity levels. Different kinds of land uses, different kinds of development, different kinds of infrastructure makes more an attractive place, and hence the revenue and the tax that comes out of it is pretty high. Also, it saves municipality at least 10% in sense of the services, public services that are required. So these are usually the outcomes of development that are more sustainable, transportation oriented. So what have I done? My research has focused on that transportation-oriented development and looking at different aspects of health, safety, and obviously improving their transportation access. So these are some of the research that I have done trying to relate to the social capital of a community, walkability and bikeability of a community. What is the kind of design that can help people be more physically active in that community? How do you create plans that are more effective and more sustainable and meets the target of the outcomes of walkability, bikeability, and being more physically active? Let me see, how much time do I have? These are some of the research which are more recently published. I'm looking at how the use of transit reduces the CO2 emissions. Also, I'm looking at how having transit-oriented development, which is one of the more recent research that I've done, looks at the effectiveness of reducing the energy efficiency of a community. So we looked at a community which is transit-oriented and we densified it. Let me just show briefly what that is. So this was a transit-oriented community in Dallas. This is a Mockingbird station, and the development is a prime example of a good transit-oriented development. This is in Dallas, Texas area. So we looked at the different kind of land uses, the commercial and residential land uses. And what we did was using Energy Plus, we tried to see, okay, based on the existing scenario, if we were to give the same number of residential units and make it more compact, what would be the energy intensity? On the other hand, leaving the community as it is, but the new development that's going to come, if you make it more densified, how is that going to get impact the energy efficiency? The results were pretty mixed, primarily because it's already a transit-oriented development, so it is efficient in some levels. But on the other hand, if you look at the number of dwelling units in the community, the amount of energy intensity is reduced, whereas if you look at it in sense of unit square area, it goes up, just because the amount of area in the development goes up. So there was this mixed result on that aspect. We also did some parametric variations. So we looked at a particular building and we said, okay, what happens if we change the distance of the spacing between the building, the setbacks between the building? What happens if we change the heights of the building? And what happens if we change the orientation of the building that we are analyzing? So we looked at different aspects of it, and what we realized was, if it is a residential building and it is a small housing, so it is a small residential building, and is surrounded by a high-rise residential, a high-rise commercial building, it tends to save the energy requirement by about 26%, which is saying the cooling load and the heating load for those environment or those buildings tends to go down by 26% in the annual cost, which is pretty high, right? And what we also realized was the amount of loading that is required. So every building that you design, a commercial or residential building, you have to make sure that you create enough capacity to provide for the maximum peak heating or cooling load. And what this does is, if you create an environment or a context in the urban environment which is very compact, the energy load for a residential versus a commercial building can go down from up to 15 to 19%. So which is pretty good, because that way the amount of the AC system that you're going to incorporate, the cost for that goes down as well. So this is a good thing for a developer, right? What is happening in sense of transit-oriented development in India? Is it something that's catching up? It is truly. In the very recent years, hardly 2-3 years now, transit-oriented development has become an approach for major cities. So you see the Jharkhand's vision, you see in Ahmedabad, you're looking at policy approaches around Delhi and NCR area. These are things that I've started looking at, how to make communities more transit-oriented. Well, for us, luckily, we have the required density in most urban areas. We have a lot of development, maybe not ideally as a mixed-use transit-oriented development, but at least we have large sets of development that can engage people into walking, biking. But how do you make it more efficient, safe? Those are the things that still needs to be analyzed. And that's what I think is the implications for the future when we are looking at transit-oriented communities in India, is to see how do you improve the service quality and frequency of transit services? How do you have better accessibility, better connectivity, more mobility, have different transportation modes that interact with each other? provide infrastructure which is safe, which is more engaging, which is more attractive for people, and looking at its impact as well. Nothing is good as it is until you really see if it is worth investing in that. So looking at the outcomes of CO2 emission, does it get reduced? Does the energy efficiency improve? Do people engage more in physical activity? Does their travel behavior change from just using cars or using taxis for the everyday travel to you trying to use public transit, which is again in most of the major cities in India now we are seeing introduction of good metro system. So how efficient are the metro system in making sure that people shift the mode of travel from non-public transit to public transit oriented? So this is all I have for today. This is my contact. I obviously am always looking for students, so this is a pitch for myself too. If you have recently graduated, are graduating and looking to see what holds for you, maybe you're like one of me who connects dots. Try it out. Come join me. I'm looking for both graduate and doctoral students all the time to help me and obviously work together on your research ideas as well. And again, as I said, it's not just transportation aspect. I'm looking at health and community and safety aspect as well. So if any of these are of interest to you, do get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to see how we can help you. And these are the sources for the majors. So I'll stop with that. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. I do see a few questions, so let me just go over some of the questions that have been put forth.
Hello, sir. Do you want me to read the questions for you?
Yeah,
sure.
please.
Yes, sir. Just a second. So we have one question from the participant. Why didn't you adopt grid-oriented transportation system which is more efficient, more sustainable for long term? Example, New York, built by brick blocks and grid systems, even Chandigarh.
Yeah, that's a grid-iron system of street network is the most efficient system in sense of interconnectivity for any modes of travel, walking, biking, or even use of cars, because it gives you more flexibility to use different routes. But the problem with that is a transportation infrastructure, change of transportation infrastructure is very expensive because transportation is just not streets. It comes with sewer system, it comes with water drain system, it comes with electrical system that goes beneath these streets. So we changing just one street network to another can be very expensive, very time consuming, and in a current existing urban environment, it is pretty much impossible to do. So we've got to live with what we have. Yes, the new urbanism design approach, that principles of new urbanism, that is what they are proposing, is having a grid network that can help have better connectivity. So yes, you're right, it's an ideal approach, but it's very expensive to do that in an existing community.
Okay, so we'll go to the next question. It is from Architect Dileepan. Besides infrastructure intervention, how do we psychologically prepare or insist our community with different income groups to use public transport models?
Well, more often than not, the reward system works. Policy approaches that have been taken is the employers tend to give special bonuses, special incentives for people who use public transportation. So, for instance, if they are using public transportation, the annual pass is paid by the employer. So, in that case, if somebody is driving to work, they don't have to pay for parking. So that saves money for them. On the other hand, it's an incentive that they don't even have to pay for their own public transportation. Sometimes these organizations tend to give more bonuses. So the more physical activity you do, if you take 10,000 steps a day, then you have some special reward that's given. And these are implemented approaches. I'm not saying that this is just something that is very rudimentary. It has been applied and has been successful. But obviously, employers are all about making profit, right? I mean, and that's a bottom line. So as long as it's not cutting into the profit, it's an approach that can be taken. Psychologically, obviously, it is driven by many factors. There are what we call a socio-ecological model, where what is the activity level of the family, people living in your household. If they generally tend to not be engaged in physical activity, children don't get to. If parents are not engaged, children don't get to engage. If their friends are not engaged in physical activity, the kids again don't get engaged in physical activity. So the socio-ecological environment has an impact on the psychological factors of what are the benefits of being more active and using public transit.
So, I have another question from the participant. In India, hot summers especially poses challenges for the cycling and walking in urban areas for short commute. How do we approach this issue?
Very good question. And I have an answer for that. It's a challenge. I live in UAE, so you can imagine the summers here. We are at a temperature of at least 53 degrees when it's peak summertime. How do you expect people to be out? Obviously not. I mean, we don't want people to die who are trying to walk and bike. But on the other hand, what has been proposed as different approaches, both planning and design approaches, is to have these street width, which are pretty small, and having high-rise buildings. And this is where, coming from my own institution, which is Maghelal Institute. If you know or have heard about what is Maghelal City, you would know that that is one of the most sustainable cities designed. It's still getting implemented. It is one of the most, ideally, an epitome for sustainable development. So if we have done this analysis of the temperature in Abu Dhabi, which is typically a very urban city like what you would see, versus Maghelal City, and we realize that having trees, having very small street width, having high-rise buildings that cover those street width, having very little setback from the street network or street corridor, those tend to reduce the ambient temperature by 14 degrees Celsius. I'm telling you that for someone who walks at a 53 degree versus walking at 40 degrees, that seems just amazingly pleasant. So it works, but again, that means you're changing the width of the existing road infrastructure. You're changing the services that goes beneath it. If it is feasible, you can. But for an existing environment, one of the things that you can do is add more trees to reduce the temperature of the street network. But peak summers and extreme weathers, irrespective of whether it snows like crazy or it becomes very hot, those are not an environment that is obviously feasible to walk for anyone.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question. What would be your current assessment about unexpected incidents like the COVID in relation to the density of cities?
Good question. It's gone both ways. Density has always been a double-edged sword. The reason being, the more density, which means there are more people to interact, more social environment, more social cohesion, more cultural activity that can be engaged into. But the problem is, it has also led to more emission, more accidents, and more crime. So that's the issue with density. With relation to COVID, certain places, and it'll be surprising that places which are more European and tend to have very high density, tend to have less impact of density on the spread of COVID. Whereas places such as US and suburban communities where people, well, culturally they are different. Obviously, we know about that. I mean, some of them tend to have no mask, and I hope you're following up the news in US. Some believe it's an infringement of their rights to have to wear a mask, and that cultural impact has increased the number of cases in US. So density is working to a certain extent, but then we cannot say that density is leading to it or it is reducing it. It's working differently in different places, and at this point, it is still being investigated if there is a one-size-fits-all for density value to COVID outcomes.
We have another question. Can a walk to work and study kind of integrated housing help urban environment?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I didn't hear that clearly.
How can a walk to work and study kind of integrated housing help urban environment?
Mm-hmm. Help urban environment, is it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, for one, if it engages two different age groups, right? People who are in the study group versus people who are employed are different age groups. So you are bringing a different kind of socio-cultural lifestyle to that community. Another thing would be about having people who are users versus providers. For instance, youth would be people who would want to be more of people who spend the money. They would want to be more people engaged in entertainment and recreational, so they would be in and out and about almost day and night. On the other hand, people who are more on the elderly side are more, let's say, beyond youth, which is around 35 to 50 years old. They would be people who have establishments, are centers of destinations of attraction to these youth. So having these different kinds of vibrant users and serving different age groups can actually help both the economy and the social environment of the community.
So we have another question. If we talk in terms of B cities of India, do you think BRTS can be efficient where there is a hurdle at every doorstep? Secondly, they are not having balanced density level throughout the city. This question is from architect Rajesh Agarwal.
Yes, BRT has worked. Ahmedabad is a good example when it started. The major issue for us is the maintenance of this infrastructure, both the service, the buses, and the interconnectivity. The way to design this primarily is to make sure that we understand the origin destination of where people start the trip versus where they end. You want to make this connection as efficient as possible with the BRT system. In India, Ahmedabad again was a good example when it started out as a BRT system. It was doing what it was supposed to, but it did not continue to the extent where it was proposed or it was assumed, because the service quality went down. And this is again one of the things that I had told about the assessment that needs to be done for transit-oriented development is this service frequency and quality, because once that starts going down, people go back to their old habits, which is obviously taking their cars and are using other modes of travel, taxi, going out with friends. Those would be the things that would hinder the successful implementation of a BRT system. A good plan and follow-up, and one of the major things about this is assessment of the implications. So once you implement a plan, how good has it been and how long has it been achieving the outcomes that it was supposed to? So those things needs to be very frequently assessed every 2 years, 3 years to make sure that we can make recommended changes. One major issue with public transit versus private mode is a private car is owned by an individual versus public transit is obviously not owned by anybody, but more of coordinated and provided as a public service by the government. And so it depends on many issues of financial support that is given and not given to public transportation system, which is not just a unique problem to India. It is a problem for public transportation services anywhere. But the better service it's providing, the better people's perception would be of using it. And that, I think, is a major challenge in our country.
Thank you, sir. We have a lot of questions pouring in the chat box. Due to the time constraint, we have to end the session. Dear participants, we will post the questions to sir, and we will have them answered and posted in our social media. Thank you, sir. I thank Architect Maghelal for accepting our invite and for spending your valuable time with us today. It was definitely an interesting session. We would end the session with a vote of thanks rendered by co-convener Professor Ashok Kumar, HOD SRMC. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, one and all present here. We are very happy and grateful and proud to have you have Dr. Praveen Lal as a speaker today, as our alumni connect, as a parent college alumni. It's really wonderful to have you today, Dr. Praveen. This is as we were asking for you over phone. He accepted immediately, and this is the situation. The sustainable development and the sustainable communities, transport-oriented system it was my topic, I'll definitely take up that topic. And it was a very grateful to listen each and every point and assessment pattern and your research on that, and you have come up with the solutions and disseminating those things to our students, participants, and faculties as well. As you are being co-chair for global teachers planning educators as a co-chair, we will also ask you at this juncture any membership for our faculties who are all doing planning and we are all teaching the planning. We will become as a member. We will also learn many things from globally, and we will disseminate those things to our students as well. Yeah,
we look forward to that.
Yeah, yes. Look forward to me. That will, of course, we are all very happy to being in the part of. No, it is not. It is the nowadays problem that the community should be a sustainable one, and transport, definitely transport is the good connect between the communities and their work to the household. That is the major. Yes.
Right.
So it will, no, not only we are into the only whether are in the local system, we can know other part of the world how they are connected to people, and those things we can learn. Also, our faculties will disseminate those ideas to our students. Of course, that will help us for our faculties and for our students. If it is possible, opportunities and possibilities from UAE Khalifa University side. We can have a tie-up or MOU with our university, SRM University and the Khalifa University. We may have a short-term exchange program between ourselves and we can have a semester abroad program. We have tied up other universities globally, as you may be knowing as our alumni. So we will also tie up with the in this UAE Khalifa University as well. We will try to benefit mutually for students, faculties as well as universities. It would be a great effort possible.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. That'll be all.
What are the possibilities there? You please forward that. We will also send through our Director International Relations. Thank you very much for that. Yes, Dr. Praveen, on behalf of SRM Seed, Ramapuram faculties and students, we thank you once again for your valuable time and expertise you are sharing with us today on this virtual mode of symposium. #2020 SRM Seed is conducting for the first 15 days. Our heartful thanks to our SRM Ramapuram management, director, dean, all our faculty, students for conducting this online webinar, very successful one. Of course, we thank all the participants, architects, faculty, students, not only from our college, from other parts of the other colleges, from different parts of India, as well as in global level. We thank you for your participation and continuous support showing to our #2020. It's a wonderful to have you here. We thank you one and all present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ashok, sir.
I'd like to thank everyone who's organized this and has invited me and hopefully tolerated me for this 40 minutes of presentation.
It's our pleasure.
I once again thank Professor Dr. Praveen Maghelal for such an interesting session. I thank all the participants of #2020 Global Architecture Vision Series. Please do join us for the next webinar session on European best practices in architecture and construction by architect Ferdoz Basha Ghosh, and we also have a workshop on tips and tricks for better digital portfolio and presentation sheets by Rituparna, an alumni student of SRMC, between 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. today. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.